Hello, I'm Father Anthony Cicada. Welcome to broadcast number 11 for the Philothea Press bestseller, Work of Human Hands, A Theological Critique of the Mass of Paul VI, by the Reverend Anthony Cicada. To order Work of Human Hands, visit www.sggresources.org. Chapter 11. The Preparation of the Gifts. Teilhard's Ofertory. By this point in our examination of the Mass of Paul VI, we're starting to catch on to the Reformers' little tricks. One was bait and switch. You invent something new, but then claim you were just restoring an ancient Christian liturgical practice. We've seen how that works out. Another was relabeling. You change the name for some part of the Mass, and then you make an undesirable theological concept disappear. In this next section of the new Mass, the preparation of the gifts, the revisers used both tricks. Ecumenical rebranding. The second part of the Old Mass is called the Mass of the Faithful. This was so because in ancient times only members of the church could be present during it. In some places the deacon even chanted a ritual formula of expulsion. If anyone is a heretic, let him leave. If anyone is a Jew, let him leave. If anyone is a pagan, let him leave. If anyone is an Arian, let him leave. It's like the greeting in the new Mass, but only in reverse. Not very ecumenical, those early Christians, were they? So Vatican II gave the Mass of the Faithful a more friendly label, the Liturgy of the Eucharist. The Offertory Rite. The first part of the Mass of the Faithful in the traditional Mass is the Offertory Rite. Its prayers express three ideas. The sacrifice is prepared, is directed to a particular purpose, and is begun. Regarding the last point, beginning the sacrifice, the traditional rite uses sacrificial language that anticipates the actual consecration of the bread and wine. So, the prayers refer to the host as the immaculate victim, and the wine as the chalice of salvation, even though neither has yet been consecrated. The language looks in expectation to the effects that will flow from offering the divine victim. Protestant objections. This language drove Luther and other Protestants crazy, because among other things it meant that the Mass was a sacrifice of propitiation, offered to make satisfaction for sin. Luther called the Catholic offertory an abomination, on account of which nearly everything sounds and reeks of oblation. He also objected to the prayers, said one Lutheran liturgist, because they anticipated the consecration and the miracle of the Mass, and invoked the divine blessing in view of the Eucharistic sacrifice to be offered. So in their own Reformed rites, the Protestants replaced the offertory with a simple direction to prepare the bread and wine. Why abolish the offertory? The modernist wing of the 20th century liturgical movement likewise sought to do away with the traditional offertory prayers. Joseph Jungmann had proposed this in a secret meeting in Germany in 1948. Why? The adepts of the liturgical movement, like Luther, complained that the prayers anticipated the sacrifice. 20 years later, Concilium would repeat this same justification for abolishing the old prayers, claiming that they, quote, did not represent the genuine meaning of the offertory rites. But when Concilium attempted to find prayers to replace the old ones, as Father Carlo Braga admitted, they could not find even one offertory prayer in all the various Western rites that did not refer to the concept of sacrificial oblation. As a result, he admitted, it was necessary to create new formulas from scratch. Another triumph for restoring ancient tradition. But if the arguments from liturgical history were so flimsy, what could be the real reason for abolishing these venerable Catholic offertory prayers? Concilium's Father Luca Brandolini provided an answer in a 1969 article. Quote, they also compromised ecumenical dialogue on the Eucharist. The lay offertory procession. Before Vatican II, the lay offertory procession was one of the favorite proposals of the liturgical movement. By 1947, more advanced parishes in Europe and America, as these photos show, had introduced the practice. But a whiff of unorthodoxy surrounded it. In Mediator Dei, Pius XII briefly noted that offertory processions had been introduced in many places, but he immediately went on for 5 paragraphs denouncing a, quote, dangerous error, unquote, about the way the faithful can be said to offer the Mass. The implication here was that many advocates of the lay offertory procession were promoting just this dangerous error. After Vatican II, the lay offertory procession was introduced everywhere as another restoration of an ancient practice. But the historical evidence for it was sparse. Concilium's internal working documents even acknowledged this, adding somewhat pathetically that the practice, quote, nevertheless, should not be held in contempt. Not exactly a ringing endorsement. But the new ceremony is a silly bit of play acting in any case. In ancient times, when a layman publicly presented the bread and wine used at Mass, he had provided these things himself. At the new Mass, however, the usual method is to have the church's sacristan place hosts and wine on a table in the back of the church. A group of laymen, who have never laid eyes on the hosts and wine before walking into the church that morning, then present their gifts to the celebrant during the procession. The procedure, Concilium's Father Rouget ruefully admitted, in reality consists only in making hosts pass from one receptacle to another. Another production from the men who claim to restore authentic liturgy according to the principle of truth. More deregulation. This procession is accompanied by a presentation song, which replaced the old offertory chant. Here we find yet another example of liturgical deregulation in the new rite. Practically speaking, the choice of text and music for the presentation song is left up to the parish liturgy planners. The priest's invitation from the Old Mass, Orate Fratres, pray, brethren, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God the Father Almighty, was likewise deregulated. In the Mass of Paul VI, it is one of the introductions or admonitions that, according to the new legislation, the priest is free to adapt to the actual situation of the community. So while conservative young Father Retro, who likes to say the black and do the red, uses the old formula verbatim at one Mass, at the next Mass, his boss, warm and welcoming Father Chuck, is free to adapt the text spontaneously, any way he sees fit. Especially since Father Chuck's new boss, it turns out, likes to do the same. Bread of life, spiritual drink. The traditional offertory prayers express a whole world of dogmatic truth about the Mass. The priest, as Christ's representative, offers the host, by anticipation the victim substantially present, to the Father. The sacrifice is offered for the priest's own sins and for all the faithful living and dead, that they obtain eternal salvation in heaven. The identification of the first prayer with Catholic doctrine is so complete, in fact, that the Lutheran liturgist Luther Reed called it, quote, a perfect exposition of Roman Catholic doctrine on the sacrifice of the Mass. So, the very idea of offertory disappeared and was replaced with the preparation of gifts. Initially, the creators of the new Mass wanted to have no prayers at all for this part of the rite. The priest would receive the bread and wine from the people and arrange them on the altar without saying anything. They feared, however, that some priests might do this a little too quickly. So some new prayers were created to act as sort of a ritual speed bump. Thus the prayer for presenting the bread reads, Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation, for through your goodness we have received the bread we offer you, fruit of the earth and work of human hands. It will become for us the bread of life. All the old sacrificial language, of course, is gone. What do we get in these new prayers? First, the base text for the prayer is not Catholic, but Jewish. It's a table blessing recited at the Seder meal that Jews eat on Passover. Blessed are you, O eternal our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruits of the earth. Blessed are you, O eternal our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. Second, the prayers contain indeterminate expressions about what the bread and wine will become. This was one of the criticisms that the Ottaviani intervention leveled against the new Mass in 1969. Concilium's original drafts for the preparation prayers spoke about the bread and wine becoming the body and blood of Christ. This language was struck and replaced with the vague expressions bread of life and spiritual drink. No problems for ecumenism there. Third, the prayer refers to the bread and wine as the work of human hands. This expression was inserted into the text at the behest of Paul VI himself, who thought that the prayer should express the concept of man's work consecrated to the Lord. This idea, it turns out, originated in the writings of the Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard was a modernist, an evolutionist, and a pseudo-mystic. He had been silenced by the Holy Office in 1925 and forbidden to publish anything on religious matters. The source is Teilhard's 1918 essay, Mass on the World. To imply, as the new prayers do, that the work of human hands, like the bread and wine, is somehow consecrated at Mass, is another example of the modernist trick of substitution and devaluation. It destroys the reality of the consecration, it degrades the real presence, and it renders meaningless the Church's teaching on the matter required for confecting the sacrament. It is also, at least implicitly, heretical. Far from encountering a perfect exposition of Roman Catholic doctrine, therefore, the priest who recites this prayer every morning will find instead the smiling ghost of Teilhard de Chardin staring approvingly back at him. Summing up. Phony restorations of antiquity, abolishing venerable prayer texts, dumping Catholic dogmas as a sop to Protestant heretics, a fake play-acting procession, Jewish table prayers, vague language deliberately chosen to obscure transubstantiation, and the cherry on top, transposing onto the Catholic Mass an idea cribbed from the thoughts of Teilhard de Chardin, an evolutionist and pantheist silenced by the Holy Office. Thus the fate in the Mass of Paul VI of what even the enemies of the faith admitted was a perfect exposition of Roman Catholic doctrine on the sacrifice of the Mass. And we are supposed to believe that the new Mass, what the modernists call the ordinary form of the Roman Rite, contains the same faith as the old Rite? Come on. To find out more, read New Offerings, Chapter 11 of Work of Human Hands, a theological critique of the Mass of Paul VI. Our next broadcast, Deplorable Impoverishment. To order Work of Human Hands, visit www.sggresources.org.